I've tried to do the same with my children to educate them. They make mistakes. Children are allowed to make mistakes. That's how they learn. So that's what I try to teach my kids. But you have to sometimes let them make those mistakes as well.
Brooklyn Beckham drops a nuclear bomb and detonates it into brand Beckham. He says that his family are ultra controlling and that his mother, Posh, rubbed her up against him at his wedding like a cow with an itchy ass.
This is not a celebrity argument. This is not a wedding dispute. And this is not just a son choosing his wife over his parents. What's happening to the Beckham family right now is something far deeper. A quiet power shift, a complete realignment of loyalty, and a family fracture so severe that it may never fully heal. For years, the Beckhams represented something rare in celebrity culture: control, unity, discipline. A global brand built not just on fame, but on structure. David Beckham, the icon. Victoria Beckham, the strategist. Their children presented as grounded, supported, and protected. That image is now broken. And at the center of it all is Brooklyn Beckham, a son who has publicly cut ties with his parents, aligned himself entirely with his wife's billionaire family, and triggered a fallout that insiders say went from private tension to irreversible rupture. This isn't chaos, it's calculation. And the consequences are already unfolding. Let's start with the moment everything changed. Brooklyn Beckham didn't just distance himself quietly, he went public, and he did it with finality. In a lengthy emotional post, he accused David and Victoria Beckham of controlling his life, prioritizing brand over family, and disrespecting his wife, Nicola Peltz. There was no soft language, no suggestion of reconciliation. No, we're working on things privately.
In a 6-page Instagram post, Brooklyn lays bare his true feelings.
I have been silent for years and have made every effort to keep these matters private. Unfortunately, my parents and their team have continued to go to the press, leaving me with no choice but to speak for myself and tell the truth about only some of the lies that have been printed. I do not want to reconcile with my family. I'm not being controlled. I'm standing up for myself for the first time in my life.
Brooklyn made it clear. He had chosen Nicola, and there was no going back. For a family that has spent decades controlling narrative, optics, and damage, that moment was seismic. But according to people close to the situation, that public post was not the beginning of the war. It was the final move. Days before Brooklyn went public, something far more serious had already happened behind closed doors. According to multiple sources, Brooklyn had sent his parents a cease and desist notice, demanding they stop mentioning him publicly and instructing them to communicate only through lawyers. Let that sink in. Not a cooling off period, not boundaries, legal silence. For David and Victoria Beckham, that move was devastating. Insiders say they were shocked, not just by the escalation, but by what it suggested, because they didn't believe that decision came from Brooklyn alone. Sources close to the Beckhams claim they suspected heavy influence from Nicola, and more significantly, from her family, especially her father, billionaire investor Nelson Peltz. In response, David and Victoria sent Brooklyn a private letter. Not a public statement, not a legal threat, a personal message. According to insiders, the letter was emotional and deeply concerned. No accusations, no demands. Just parents asking one thing: reassurance that their son was okay. Instead of easing tensions, that letter appears to have pushed Brooklyn further away. Within days, the public post went live. Brooklyn insisted he was finally standing up for himself. He rejected the idea that Nicola controlled him, arguing that the real control had always come from his parents. He framed the break as liberation. But this is where the narrative begins to fracture. Because while Brooklyn insists he's free, every move he's made since suggests something very different. Since the fallout, Brooklyn's entire world has shifted firmly into the Peltz orbit. Social life, professional connections, public appearances. Reports suggest he now communicates with his parents only through intermediaries. Observers began asking a question no one wanted to voice out loud. If this is freedom, why does it look like total isolation from one side and complete dependence on the other? And then there's the moment everyone keeps returning to: the wedding. More specifically, the first dance. Brooklyn has claimed that his mother stepped into a moment meant solely for him and Nicola. A moment, he says, left him humiliated and caused Nicola to leave the room in tears. Accounts vary depending on who you ask, but one detail never changes: That night altered everything. Guests have described a visible shift in energy. What was meant to symbolize unity instead exposed emotional fault lines that never healed. Boundaries, expectations, power. For Nicola, that moment appears to have been decisive. According to people close to the situation, she made her position clear afterward. Brooklyn could not maintain the same relationship with his parents and remain her partner. It came down to a choice, and Brooklyn chose Nicola. Since then, the freeze has deepened, invitations declined, family gatherings skipped, communication shut down. Insiders claim Nicola refuses to attend any event where David and Victoria are present. Whether that's self-protection or strategy depends on perspective, but the outcome is undeniable. Brooklyn Beckham is now almost entirely disconnected from the family he grew up in. While Nicola remains highly visible, one figure remains almost completely silent, and that silence speaks volumes. Nelson Peltz, a billionaire investor, a corporate heavyweight, a man known for leverage, discipline, and results. According to multiple reports, Nelson Peltz was never particularly impressed with Brooklyn. Not publicly, not cruelly, just skeptically. Sources suggest he viewed Brooklyn's career path, photography, cooking, lifestyle branding, as scattered and lacking long-term focus. No insults, no confrontations, just quiet dismissal. And when someone with that level of wealth and influence isn't convinced by you, that skepticism carries weight, especially when you live inside their family ecosystem. There's another detail that has raised serious concern. Before the wedding, a strict prenuptial agreement was signed. If the marriage were to end, Brooklyn would not have access to the Peltz family fortune. He would walk away with only what the couple built together. On paper, that's standard. In context, it's alarming. Because Brooklyn didn't just marry Nicola. He distanced himself from his parents, his siblings, and the structure that supported him his entire life. If the marriage collapsed, he wouldn't just lose his wife, he'd lose his entire support system. That imbalance has reportedly haunted David and Victoria Beckham. Despite everything, sources say the door remains open on their side. They would welcome Brooklyn back immediately. No conditions, no public apology, no demands. Brooklyn, however, says he has no regrets. Meanwhile, his siblings continue forward. Careers advancing, family bonds intact, public support steady. The contrast has fueled speculation. If the Beckham household was truly as controlling as Brooklyn claims, why did only one child walk away and do it so completely? One of the most revealing voices in this story came from an unexpected place: football. A former youth coach from Brooklyn's time at Queens Park Rangers spoke publicly, not to assign blame, but to describe something deeper. He painted a picture of a childhood shaped by anxiety, pressure, and emotional distance. He spoke about full-time security at 14, about how fame and wealth don't equal stability, about moments that felt unsettling even to someone used to working with children of famous families. His message was subtle, but powerful. Brooklyn didn't grow up normal, and that lack of normalcy made him vulnerable. Vulnerable to influence, vulnerable to pressure, vulnerable to believing that cutting everyone off was the only way to feel safe. And here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of the story. Nicola didn't leave her world to join Brooklyn's. Brooklyn left his world to join hers. She retained her family, her support system, her financial independence. Brooklyn tied his emotional future to one household, the Peltz household. That imbalance is what worries observers most. Not because anyone is evil, not because Brooklyn is weak, but because isolation changes power dynamics. When one family becomes your only anchor, their influence grows, even without overt control. Nelson Peltz has said nothing publicly, no denials, no clarifications, and in his world, silence isn't accidental, it's strategic. Insiders describe him as unimpressed by image alone. Reports suggest he views Brooklyn as unfocused, still searching for direction, benefiting from a famous name without proving long-term value. That perception, fair or not, carries consequences. So here's where everything stands. Two powerful families, two different value systems, one son caught in the middle. Brooklyn insists he's free. His parents say they'll wait forever. Nicola remains central and unwavering. Nelson Peltz remains silent. And the longer this drags on, the more permanent it becomes. Because this isn't just emotional, it's structural. And once structures change, going back isn't simple. So here's the question that hangs over everything. If Brooklyn ever changes his mind, who decides whether he's allowed back? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure you're subscribed, because the stories behind the image are always the ones that matter most.